Greetings once again, fellow skeptics and lovers of Western culture, in a way that's definitely not racist, and welcome back to the Intellectual Thunderdome, wherein we rational big boys can congratulate ourselves over how much smarter we are than feminists and cultural Marxists, which are definitely real and not based on a literal Nazi conspiracy theory, because we know there's a conspiracy by a shady but unnamed organisation of degenerates and enemies of Western society to undermine the dominance of the white race by allowing people of minority and or marginalised groups to exist in media, but they're not Jews. I promise I'm not a Nazi. That's right, as we all know, the existence of women or black people in positions of prominence or power in media can only make sense if there's a leftist liberal feminist agenda, which is definitely not a contradiction because I totally understand what liberalism is. I mean, what, you think audiences might just enjoy diversity and corporations realise that they can make more money by appealing to as wide and diverse a demographic as possible? You fucking globalist simp. Did you hear that, libcucks? I'm going to be attacking and taking down your cultural icons, which I assume are cartoons for children, superhero TV shows nobody cares about because that's what my cultural icons are, and then crying for hours and hours about people on the internet disagreeing with me about Star Wars on my podcast, whilst playing it off as just constructive criticism and a difference of opinion whilst my fans dogpile and harass my ideological enemies, but I'm totally not responsible for cultivating an incredibly toxic fan base even when I obviously hint that they should go and downvote bomb content I don't like. I have a very healthy attitude towards women, and the fact that I get unbelievably upset over not finding a child in a cartoon of little girls sexy is not indicative of any issues I might benefit from getting therapy to work on, and likewise, me saying that the only reason a black woman could ever be cast in a superhero TV show is because of some kind of diversity quota I made up doesn't imply that I have any racial bias at all. Also, Brie Larson's existence is absolutely worth creating hundreds of videos about, and I'm definitely not at Thunderfoot levels of obsession with one pretty milquetoast liberal feminist.
Is it water with the sheep in the box?
I've often seen, in the right-wing media criticism sphere online, a tendency for people to patronisingly appeal to authority and say that, actually, if you take a screenwriting course, you'll see that they were right all along, and that not only can art be objectively judged, but also the reason movies I hate are bad is because of forced diversity, a very real thing that exists. Motherfucker, I have a screenwriting degree. Don't fucking tell me to take a screenwriting class just because I disagree with you on movies you like. I spent 3 years exclusively taking screenwriting classes. Further, if you're going to claim that actually academia is obsolete and that actually the real critics are the general public who vote with their money, then I might be inclined to agree, but we're stuck in the rather unfortunate position of having to debate over whether or not this means that The Last Jedi was a good film because it made a ton of money, or Black Panther is a great film because it got good reviews from critics and audiences alike. Now, the fact of the matter is that I simply do not give a fuck about Star Wars or the MCU. They're mostly good movies, but at the end of the day they hold no real emotional significance for me. However, I do find it fascinating that time after time, those on the right wing return to this subject like a child obsessively picking at a scab, unable to get past the fact that their favourite franchises have more minority representation or, to be blunt, have women, LGBTQ+ people and women of colour in nowadays. Sometimes they'll talk about forced diversity, and don't worry, we'll get to that, but for now I want to discuss what diversity even is, and then we'll get on to discussing the deeper meanings, motivations, and philosophy associated with it. This should be fun.
In Britain alone, there are at least 1 million men and 1 million women who are homosexual. Now, for some reason, the law takes an entirely different attitude toward the two sexes in this matter. Between women, homosexuality is perfectly legal, but between men it's a crime, rendering the offender liable to several years of imprisonment. There are only half a dozen countries in the world in which it is a crime, but for some reason Britain is one of them.
If you listen to the strange man on the internet called Jeremy, who make a living sitting in a basement getting unreasonably upset about movies and comic books from an audience of millions while surrounded by nerd paraphernalia, you would be forgiven for thinking that what diversity is when someone who's not a cis-het white man appears in a superhero movie, which is a conspiracy enacted by some nefarious organisation, but definitely not the Jews because these people aren't Nazis, even though they regularly play defence for Hitler. But sadly, it seems that some people did in fact go on the internet and tell lies because that's not how words work, and it's certainly not what diversity is. So what is diversity? Well, according to Wikipedia, Diversity is a British street dance group formed in 2007 and based in London. They're best known for winning the third series of Britain's Got Talent in 2009, beating out Susan Boyle in the live final. Diversity consists of friends from London and Essex, including 4 sets of siblings and 8 other members. Oh wait, no, that's the wrong diversity, sorry. Google's dictionary is about as helpful as ever, defining it as the state of being diverse and a range of different things. The Global Diversity Practice defines it thusly. Diversity is any key dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. In a nutshell, it's about empowering people by respecting and appreciating what makes them different in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, education, and national origin. Diversity allows for the exploration of these differences in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment. It means understanding one another by surpassing simple tolerance to ensure people truly value their differences. This allows us both to embrace and also celebrate the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual and place positive value on diversity in the community and in the workforce. And according to the people who sit in front of a camera reading an article verbatim but in an angry voice and making snarky comments whenever a black or gay person has the audacity to exist in the proximity of nerd culture, diversity is when a nebulous and undefined implied organisation of nefarious individuals, who for the sake of ease I will refer to as them, push degeneracy in my media, but it's not the same as cultural Bolshevism, I swear. There's actually been a lot of study into different approaches to diversity in the West, particularly with the focus of creating a more harmonious society, but of course that's just ridiculous. Why would anyone want that? Now let's just ignore the studies that compare colourblindness and multiculturalism and found that in general colourblind ideology, pretending that race doesn't exist and treating everyone the same regardless of background or ethnicity, which is what most of these people support, because it means that they can pretend to have transcended racism and or accuse the left of being the real racists, and that's why it's definitely not racist to get mad about a black Catwoman, is associated with greater levels of prejudice, especially implicit prejudice, whereas multicultural ideology, acknowledging and embracing the differences between people of different backgrounds in order to facilitate justice and equality and to better improve the living conditions of minority group members, is that equality, equity and justice comic basically, is associated with reduced levels of prejudice, including both implicit and explicit prejudice, because that's political and they made She-Ra gay and Batwoman black in 2 TV shows I was never going to watch anyway. Wah wah, I'm a giant fucking baby.
If this doesn't make you understand that there is a cancer at Lucasfilm called social justice nonsense, then nothing will ever convince you.
Captain Marvel doesn't do that at all, okay? In fact, the entire film is a feminist allegory.
No! No! First, Marvel comes out with the New Warriors, then this shit. All I gotta say is, oh my god, Marvel and DC both have lost it. Nobody asked for this. Nobody wants this.
Please name the names of the men that do not deserve those jobs. I would love to hear some specifics, but of course we won't get specifics.
Yes, that's right. On the left is the new She-Ra. She-Ra. And here is old She-Ra. I don't know if you notice anything here, but that's a man.
The first thing that comes to my mind when I go and see a comic book movie, you know, when I buy a ticket and go to the theatre to see a superhero flick, the first thing that comes into my mind, the first thing I'm thinking about is, oh, I really hope that this movie has gay sex.
And not only is she a woman, of course, you've got to have a female, she is a black woman and she's bisexual. So she fits all the check boxes, she's doing well. So hey, bravo, Batwoman, you got your black bisexual barehanded throat squeezing replacement.
So now we have a better understanding of the various definitions of diversity, let's talk about diversity and representation in media.
3 months ago, we devoted a This Week programme to male homosexuality. But by confining ourselves to men, we were dealing with only half the problem.
Because I don't hate black people. Okay, I know that's stupid and reductive, but honestly, that's how it comes across a lot of the time. After all, if you exclusively get mad about women, people of colour, and LGBTQ+ people appearing in your favourite media, what other conclusion can I possibly draw without just asking you why you think it's bad? Because usually these guys don't like to come out and say why without prompting for some reason, and somehow believe your answer. We'll discuss that in a little more detail in the next section, but before I really get into why diversity is not bad, and trying to understand the reasons why someone would be so against it, I thought for balance, I would give a brief rundown of why I believe diversity is a positive thing and explain why and how I came to that conclusion. Spoilers, it's not anything to do with the quality of a film because obviously a black or gay or trans or whatever actor or director is not going to be any better or worse than a cishet white dude based on that identity, and from all we know about Hollywood, it's much more likely that a white dude might get a job through nepotism or the undercurrent of institutional prejudice that has been proliferated throughout the industry, as has been reported on again and and again, so if anything, a white cis actor or director has a higher chance of being worse, or at least to have landed a gig through means other than talent, unless of course you're willing to say that Hollywood is a meritocracy, in which case I guess Rian Johnson was just the best guy for the job directing The Last Jedi, that 3-year-old movie only weird nerds on the internet still care about because everyone else has moved on, unless you're willing to admit that there's more factors at play in cishet white dudes getting a disproportionate amount of the jobs in Hollywood beyond talent and hard work, of course. Oh, who am I kidding? They'll just claim it's a secret communist conspiracy pushed by Disney, a corporation that only gets to survive under capitalism and has nothing to gain and everything to lose by supporting the far left. I guess let's just get into it. First off, I think it should be pretty clear that people of minority groups or identities don't appear as much in media as they do in society, otherwise around 50% of Hollywood movie protagonists would be women, 10% would be LGBTQ+, 1% would be trans, 13% should be black people, and 18% should be Hispanic, at least approximately. But the fact that this isn't the case, and in fact most movies nowadays clearly disproportionately favour cishet white dudes for some inconceivable reason, I can't imagine why. So the first reason I would like to see more diversity and a wider range of stories and perspectives is because it's simply reflective of the society in which we live, and in many ways it's dishonest, and implies a bias within the industry. After all, everything being equal, we would expect our media to approximately demographically reflect the society that created it, unless there was some other external force acting upon it that might affect this, of course. After all, if media doesn't reflect society, in a way it's misleading. We know that by rights there should be more women, black people, gays, etc. in movies, even if the movies aren't about those identities. So why not do everything we can to rectify that imbalance? You can say, well, the idea is to pick the best person for the job, but then what? Are you implying that black people are genetically worse actors and directors or something? Seriously, I cannot think of a non-bigoted reason one would believe that the only reason there's not more diversity in media is because cishet white dudes are just better for these roles. Maybe you might have an argument in specific circumstances, like a historical epic or period piece, in which case, yes, obviously casting this guy as black probably wouldn't make much sense, but a modern day superhero or sci-fi movie, fuck it, why not? It just makes sense. Americans really like to pretend that they're a lot more tolerant than they really are, as the performative reactions to the BLM protests have demonstrated. Come on now, there's no way you weren't aware of the massive issues of police brutality or that this shit was okay. One particular way this manifests is by either denying or ignoring the demonstrable effects of representation, or lack thereof, on the development and sense of self-esteem and belonging of minority groups in a society. After all, if in an overwhelming majority of books, TV shows and movies, people like you are either not present, regulated to second or third rate background characters, stereotypes or villains, it's going to start to feel like the society that produced and uncritically enjoys that media maybe doesn't have the highest opinion of you and people like you, and certainly doesn't consider you as important or worthy of respect or representation as cishet white people. It's important for children to see characters who look and sound like them. More kids have low self-esteem when they see their group shown in a negative way. In our study we showed children images of cartoon faces and played voices that used different accents. We asked kids to tell us if the person was good or bad, or if they couldn't tell. Then we asked them why they thought that. First and second graders had no problem sorting these faces into good and bad characters. They told stories about why a character was a hero or villain. They said a face looked like a princess or like someone who goes to jail. It's not surprising that children were quick to say who's good and who's evil. They see so many stereotypes on television. That is why it's important for characters to have different traits. It's okay for characters to have non-American accents, but good guys should have them too. Heroes should be male and also female. African American and Hispanic characters should have more leading roles. These movies show us that people are all different and complex. Maybe TV shows and animated series will do the same. If that happens, we'll finally move beyond television stereotypes. Children have been seeing them far too long. With this in mind, is it not worth pushing for representation to ensure that people from disadvantaged groups are made to feel valued and included within our society, and that the majority don't get constantly bombarded with propaganda about how inferior and dumb they are? They are an important part of our society regardless, so why not have a media that reflects that? For the longest time, minorities have been used as shorthand for villains in media. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here because there are multiple studies as well as excellent videos made by other much more informed people entirely around this fact, but it's undeniable. The first feature film was about the heroic KKK lynching a black man, and the Hays Code mostly relegated LGBTQ+ representation and or coding to villainous characters who mostly died as a result of their perceived sins due to the three main principles of the code, which I'll briefly go over now. 1. No picture picture should be produced that will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Hence, the sympathy of the audience should never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. Obviously, given cultural attitudes towards queerness or queer expression of any kind in the past, this basically meant that any kind of LGBTQ+ representation was effectively banned, because it wasn't until extremely recently that a majority of people didn't consider homosexuality to be crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin, or indeed lowering the moral standards of those who see it. Remember, the Hays Code was created during the 30s. Homosexuality was a crime punishable by a heavy prison sentence all the way until 1967 in the UK, and technically still is in a few places in the US. The Supreme Court did declare these laws unconstitutional in 2003, though some states do still have sodomy laws on the books to this day, although they are rarely actually enforced. And legalization was not popular by any stretch. 2. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be represented. Again, similar to the above, this wording very clearly implies to the public of the 1930s that the version of life and normality that must be presented is your standard cishet nuclear family. It's actually very similar to the wording of Section 28 with the pretended family relationship bit, which I guess just goes to show that bigotry and the rhetoric associated with it doesn't change much over time. 3. Law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation. And here's the important part. Assuming that given the time in which the code was instituted, homosexuality, and especially transgenderism, intersexuality, etc. would have been considered against the natural or human law, it wasn't too long ago that being LGBTQ+ was considered a psychological disorder after all, it was effectively impossible to have a sympathetic portrayal of a queer or even queer-coded character. In fact, the only way such a character could even be allowed at all is, as mentioned, as a villain who gets a brutal comeuppance at the end of the movie, and their queerness is portrayed entirely through coding and stereotype. These tropes continue to this day, by the way. From Scar to Ursula to Xerxes in that incredibly fashy Sparta movie, it's not even conscious a lot of the time, it's just become a fact of cinema, and a trope that queer equals villain, because if you impose something like that on every movie for several decades, just as the industry is starting to find its feet, well, that sort of thing is difficult to really undo, you know? And honestly, the portrayal of people of colour in media throughout history is not great either. For decades, black people were exclusively portrayed as stereotypes, criminals, or occasionally weird tropes like the magic black man, and it's become very clear through movements like Oscars So White, as well as multiple instances of deliberately not pushing too hard for black and gay representation or even cutting it out, when big movies get broadcast in places where perhaps the attitudes towards black people and or homosexuality are not as positive as one might like. For decades, people of minority groups were treated as other, partly due to things like the Hays Code, but also as a sort of shorthand. For the same reason, villains are often inhuman or disfigured in some way, that which we do not recognise or that comes across as different or abnormal can be very, very scary. That's why good and relatable fictional aliens look like this, and evil and bad ones look like this most of the time. There are some exceptions, but I won't go into it here. Go and watch that Lindsay Ellis video about the other in media if you're interested. And in the same way as H.R. Geiger's alien design was created to look as unsettling as possible and just full of dicks and fanny just everywhere, to people in the past, the idea of LGBTQ+ or black people were the other, and that's why Birth of a Nation could rely on the horror of black people having power, Psycho could create the horror of Norman Bates' cross-dressing and implied queerness, and of course Silence of the Lambs infamously used Buffalo Bill's potential transness to make the same point. To be fair, there is a throwaway line of dialogue that confirms that Bill is not a real trans person, though given the recent dialogue around transgenders and scaremongering about kids supposedly being forced to transition, I'm not sure that's much better. As a result, I would contend that it's incredibly important to try and counteract this history of negative portrayal that has influenced so much of culture, even modern storytelling, because I would be willing to bet that a lot of kids are very much shaped by the villainous feminine man trope or the coding of black characters as unintelligent or animalistic. Therefore, moving forward, it would be a great idea, in my opinion, to have more positive role models for people of minority groups and more positive portrayals of them in media. But, you may be thinking, this is only good, positive diversity. A lot of the time, the weird cinema gatekeepers actually say that they think diversity in general is good, but in the movies they don't like, which all seem to prominently feature women or minorities for totally coincidental reasons, they're actually complaining about a specific kind of bad or forced diversity, as opposed to movies like Alien, which absolutely wasn't forced diversity, so you're just strawmanning them by saying that they hate all diversity. So let's discuss that, I guess.
There are 190,000 colour people in this country. People say that the colour bar is beginning to fade, but I wonder if it is. I think if we were honest with ourselves, that we'd admit it would be a bit of a shock if we were told that our sister or daughter was going to marry a coloured man.
I believe the premise here is that a lot of the time, rather than being naturally diverse, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean, media executives force people of colour, women and LGBTQ+ people into their products in a cynical ploy to draw in audiences, which sounds more like a critique of an economic system that incentivizes maximising revenue by appealing to more demographics coming from an incredibly racist person, to be honest. And what even is naturally occurring diversity in a man-made work of art like a movie? Here's how people who get mad about it define it anyway.
Forced diversity. It just doesn't work. And I'd like to tell you why it doesn't work. The main reason, and indeed the essential reason, is that it detracts from the story. That is the dividing line between diversity which is forced into a story and diversity which is incidental to a story or maybe essential to whatever story you happen to be telling. So my definition of forced diversity, which is a great place to start to examine some of these deeper reasons, is forced diversity is the inclusion of characters in media that are members of social, ethnic, or sexual groups for no discernible story reason.
I am completely fine with any kind of character, be they female, black, gay, crippled, whatever, so long as they're a natural part of the character and isn't some focal point for the story.
I prefer the Urban Dictionary definition, to be perfectly honest. So let's go through some of the recent examples of what is often accused of being forced diversity to try to understand where they're coming from. Netflix's She-Ra and the Princesses of Power is a reboot of the 1980s She-Ra cartoon, updated for modern audiences, and to appeal to modern kids who honestly would probably fucking hate the cheesy weirdness that kids in the 80s lapped up. Probably the most prominent of these meltdowns came from everybody's favourite Hitler fan and man who literally got banned from Magic the Gathering events after repeatedly sexually harassing cosplayers, The Quartering, who has made multiple videos about this cartoon for children he doesn't watch. The motivation behind each video varies, but for the most part it boils down to some variation on it goes against traditional gender roles and expectations, and also there are gays involved.
Well, it's finally over. 5 seasons of memory erasing, Tumblr fanfic masquerading as She-Ra has finally ended.
Why? Why?
Particular television show aimed at children pushing an agenda. That is exactly what the Netflix She-Ra did. That is not undifferent than the original She-Ra, which pushed an agenda, except their agenda was selling toys. The agenda She-Ra pushed was far different and far more interesting, one that probably should be aimed at a different audience than a kid's cartoon. When I commented on Twitter that there is a clear agenda, people were quick to gaslight me and say that what a crazy thing to be saying. What a crazy thing to be saying. I mean, I'm only looking at headlines that say She-Ra returns to Netflix for its final season, and spoiler, everything is gay and getting gayer by the minute. I mean, I love it. I'm sure. I mean, what am I talking about? What am I talking about? You know, what could I possibly be alluding to? She-Ra and the Princess of Power, a child's show, finale canonizing lesbian relationship between Catra and Adora. I mean, I don't know what I could possibly be referring to here.
His original video basically consisted of him crying over the character design because rather than sexualizing the character and turning her into some kind of weird sex object ideal of what a man in the 80s thought was acceptable for a woman on TV, the team behind the show, led by a gay woman, opted to keep the design more realistic for a 17-year-old girl and also magical warrior princess, whilst, I might add, keeping her still very feminine. Like, I know weirdos on the internet genuinely believe that womanhood is stored in the huge anime titties, but the reality is that if you saw someone who looked like this walking down the street, you probably wouldn't assume that she was a man or a teenage boy or whatever. For a start, she's like 8 feet tall, and I don't think that many pubescent boys who have that kind of growth spurt, but come on mate, the fact that she's not a 25-year-old woman with double D's wearing a metal ball gown doesn't make her unfeminine, it just makes her, and again, I feel the need to remind you that she is 17 years old in the show, less sexually appealing to you, a weird middle-aged Magic the Gathering misogynist sex pest, which, like, good, the show wasn't made for you or anyone else to jack off to, buddy, but if you really want to die on this hill, go ahead, I guess. Speaking of changes, let's also address the other main gripe the weird reactionaries online had with She-Ra. It's hella gay, and like Korra and that gay rat wedding thing, the right wing lost their minds over the idea of a gay person being allowed to exist in media, even though it's not like there was a fully animated lesbian sex scene in which the 8-foot tall superhero lady explicitly goes down on the cat assassin. They just had a kiss. One kiss. Between people who've been friends since childhood. Yeah, I'm sure this would have totally caused the exact same problems if nothing had changed, except it was a cat boy instead, though Nick Fuentes would probably have preferred that. But I guess let's just ignore that, eh? The main point that these guys, and it is usually guys, pretend to care about is this idea that actually this is in some way offensive, to take a pre-existing character who was originally straight and make them gay or bi or whatever, to which my response is twofold. First, why does it matter if, as you say, you're not homophobic and you're not even a fan of the original cartoon? Seems a bit like you're using this to further a political agenda, which is weird because I thought you were explicitly against doing that. And secondly, well, She-Ra was always gay. Okay, maybe I should clarify. She-Ra, the original cartoon, and He-Man before it, with their ridiculous character designs and over-the-top camp and macho aesthetics, were and still are beloved by the gay community and are LGBTQ+ icons in their own right. As one commentator said of He-Man, the best part about rewatching He-Man after the initial nostalgia burst was tracking the show's hilarious homoeroticism, an aspect I missed completely as a first grader. In the ever-growing lineup of outed classic superheroes, He-Man might be the easiest target of all. It's almost too easy. Prince Adam, He-Man's alter ego, is a ripped Nordic page boy with blinding teeth and sharply waxed eyebrows who spends lazy afternoons pampering his timid pet cat. He wears lavender stretch pants, furry purple Ugg boots, and a sleeveless pink blouse that clings like saran wrap to his pecs. To become He-Man, Adam harnesses what he calls fabulous secret powers. His clothes fall off, his voice drops a full octave, his skin turns from vanilla to nut brown, his giant sword starts gushing energy, and he adopts a name so absurdly masculine it's redundant. Next, he typically runs around seizing space wands with glowing knobs and fabulously straddling giant rockets. He hangs around with people called Fisto and Ram Man, and they exchange wink wink nudge nudge dialogue. I'd like to hear more about this hooded seed man of yours. I feel the bony finger of Skeletor. Your assistance is required on Snake Mountain. Once you start thinking along those lines, it's impossible to stop. It's a prime example of how easily an extreme fantasy of masculinity can circle back to become its opposite. And honestly, with She-Ra, this theme absolutely continues. Just taking a look at He-Man and She-Ra and the Secret of the Sword, for example, the movie that originally introduced She-Ra into the He-Man mythos, this is how we are introduced to the character of Bo, who people like Jeremy really don't like because he has gay dads in the reboot.
You're under arrest.
You're not making a slave out of anyone today, hordsman.
So, another troublemaker. Let's get them both. I knew this would happen.
Yes, that is what one of the main characters in this totally very heterosexual cartoon looked like. And have we forgotten that She-Ra literally rides a rainbow unicorn? She may not have kissed any girls in the 80s, but She-Ra was always gay. It's just now she's able to come out without receiving quite so much hatred. That's a sadly common occurrence nowadays. Philip Schofield didn't feel comfortable coming out as a gay man until the age of 58, for fuck's sake. Rey, the argument usually goes, is forced diversity because her character being a woman is not a natural part of the character and is some focal point to the story. Despite the fact that throughout the sequel trilogy, Rey's gender is rarely, if ever, even acknowledged, seems pretty natural and is not in any way a focal part of the story. Almost as if the people saying this actually really hated the character of Rey for completely unrelated reasons and had to scramble to find a justification for their misogyny. Usually, at this point, the argument turns to classic female action heroes of the past, and declarations that Sigourney Weaver's Ripley in Ridley Scott's Alien franchise is a fantastic example of how to do diversity right, because her femininity is simply a part of her as a character, not focused on at all.
For example, Ripley from the Alien franchise is fucking awesome, by far and away my favorite female character ever. The fact that she's female is never brought to the forefront, and no one ever makes it a point that, because of that, she's better than any other character. The difference between a character like Ripley and a character like Rey is that one is a naturally implemented character and the other is not.
And the thing is, I've never thought of Ripley as a female character before, or a strong female character, which I know might sound insulting, but my point is that I've always just viewed her simply as a character, no more, no less. I've never felt the need to label her as something special, because I don't watch Aliens and get the impression there was any type of agenda or any type of point they were trying to make about women with the character. And this is an approach I wish those writing the new Star Wars sequel trilogy could have understood.
What they usually don't bother mentioning is that the character of Ripley was supposed to be played by a man up until the very last minute, at which point an executive decision was made to flip the protagonist's gender in a cynical attempt to draw in potential female audiences. Or if you like, Ripley was an example of forced diversity rather than a refutation of it. Unlike Rey, who was simply a female version of Luke Skywalker, her gender was planned from the beginning and informs but doesn't dominate her character. Most criticisms of Rey coming from angry Star Wars nerds can easily be be applied to Luke, and the ones that can't are specifically variations on she shouldn't be able to do that because she's a girl or whatever. Some of which are arguably explained in episode 9, though incredibly poorly, and most of them are just incredibly dumb. Don't get me wrong, I do think that some stuff in, for example, The Last Jedi does push the believability of Rey's innate abilities with the Force a little based on previous canon, but that's just nerd shit, not anything to do with diversity or her gender or anything. They would be just as unrealistic or against canon or whatever these people cry about if Rey was a dude, right? I don't know, I don't really care about Star Wars, and I don't really want to get into a fight about the minutiae of lore with some reactionary dipshits who've built a career around crying about how a fictional woman in a 3-year-old movie is a bad SJW Mary Sue and spend hours attempting and failing to tear down other people who have a mildly dissenting opinion about a movie on the internet. It's a soulless work of corporate art designed to make money and sell toys, and less than half of the movies are any good. No judgment if you are, but I just can't understand people who get super invested in shit like that. Okay, maybe every movie is an exaggeration, but if you take the word of the people who believe this, it only makes logical sense. Usually, if you're having a conversation about forced diversity, someone will bring up this infamous video by the Dishonored Wolf, who's definitely not right-wing. He insists he's a centrist whilst exclusively attacking the left and decrying progressivism, but he says he's a centrist, so fuck it. And honestly, it's not a great video, but I'm going to talk about it because it seems to be where most of the people who talk about this got their ideas. The main point made here appears to be this: if a character is a member of a marginalised and usually underrepresented group in media, there should be a valid story reason for doing so, because otherwise it detracts from the narrative or somehow makes the movie worse or something. The obvious rebuttal to this is quite simply, well, why? If a white person or heterosexual person or cis person or whatever doesn't need a narrative purpose to be allowed to exist within a story, why does a black or gay or trans person? People complain constantly about Rey from Star Wars being a woman, but honestly, if you gender swapped her, she'd just be Luke Skywalker pretty much. I don't recall any explanation being required to justify Luke being heterosexual or white or male, by the way. How many movies have heterosexual romance subplots? How many movies go out of their way to give their characters a case of the not gays? If having a gay character in a movie requires explanation and or justification, why doesn't every straight character in almost every historical and contemporary movie? And crucially, why not? Look, these people exist. They have as much right to be in your movies as any cishet white dude, and if you don't want to be called bigoted, you're going to have to explain why a bisexual black woman can't be in the superhero TV show you don't even watch without that criticism also being easily applicable to, for example, Batman being played by any of the cishet white dudes who have taken up the cowl so far. If Rey being a woman needs a narrative explanation, why doesn't Luke being a man? If She-Ra needs a narrative explanation in order for her sexuality to be acceptable, why does every straight character in every other cartoon ever made not also require one? If the CW needs to justify the casting of Javicia Leslie as Batwoman, why don't they have to do the same for Stephen Amell as Green Arrow? I guess you could make the argument that it's not comic book accurate, but none of these shows or movies are. There absolutely have been black Green Arrows in the comics, but regardless, I have yet to see anyone crying about Thanos not being in a weird relationship with the Marvel Comics universe's version of the manifestation of death, just the existence of black people, women, and LGBTQ plus people. Weird that. I'm sure it's just a perfectly normal and healthy attitude to take though. Don't read into it too much.
Women workers don't mind routine, repetitive work, and they're particularly good on work that requires high finger dexterity or an unusual sense of accuracy.
Honestly, who cares so much about this shit? Don't get me wrong, I love movies and TV shows, and when I was a kid I was really into comic books, but seriously now, I've been accused of caring about Star Wars because I made a few videos mocking Reactionaries for their ridiculous over-the-top hatred for it, and I do mention blockbusters among the more obscure movies I often talk about in this series because I don't want to come off as too pretentious, but also because I want to use examples most people will have actually seen to illustrate my points. The truth is, I don't fucking care about Star Wars. Star Wars is a product created by one of the biggest corporations on the planet in order to make money and sell toys. As a work of art, it's up and down. You know, I like some of the movies fine and I think others are shite, but like, why would you get so upset about the minutiae of a fictional world designed to sell toys to children and, I guess, display models to adults? I find it very disconcerting when people like Geeks Plus Gamers, The Quartering, or the weirdos on Smudcast or EFAP lose their fucking minds every time there's an incredibly banal change made to Star Wars or Batwoman or She-Ra or whatever, and usually I think it's incredibly sad sad that they base so much of their life and so much of their time caring so much about things that not only matter so little, but also things that are controlled by a cynical corporation, mostly just looking to make as much money as possible without actually caring about art or quality. You think you hate women or gays or black people, but admit it, you don't. You just hate capitalism. Further, if we're willing to pretend that actually capitalism is good, because I don't see Mauler making any anti-capitalist arguments anytime soon, let's discuss artistic freedom. What is the role of an artist? Is an artist beholden to their fans, or can they create what they choose, or what they feel inspired to make? Because if you're out here trying to stop artists making what they want to make, or insist that they conform to your idea of what their art should be, then aren't you by definition stifling creativity? Look, I know you may be invested in Star Wars, but it's not yours. Enjoy it all you like, obsess over it, consume it, write fan fiction to your heart's content, but you don't have the right to demand that artists and corporations do what you like, unless I guess you buy the rights, but I doubt you have that kind of cash. Maybe one day copyright law will be abolished and we can all make our own Star Wars movies, and I'm sure the one at Literature Devil writes will be objectively perfect, but until that time, shut the fuck up, go to therapy, and stop feeling like you have the right to control what artists do with their art, unless you're willing to accept that the problem is capitalism, of course, in which case, welcome to the revolution, comrade. Talking about and thinking about media is both interesting and important, and of course you can like whatever the fuck you want, but for the love of God, stop with the weird gatekeeping nonsense. Stop being unhealthily obsessed with every tiny aspect of fucking Star Wars or the MCU. Stop being so angry when you see a minority character in your favourite franchises, or franchises you can plausibly pretend to care about for clicks, and above all, accept the following. Not all art is for you. Sometimes other people like to see themselves represented in media, and corporations, seeing money to be made, will cater to that demand. Also, please watch another fucking movie. There's more than just Star Wars and superhero shit out there, you know?
Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this. If you did, I know this was a long one, as was the last episode in the series, but I promise this won't be a repeating theme. I do actually want to keep these videos relatively short, but the issue of politicization of media as well as representation is such a huge topic that I already had to split it up into the two separate videos rather than one. Next time we'll be talking about sexualization versus empowerment, the male gaze, and power fantasy, so that'll be interesting, and I'm sure if this video doesn't really piss the chuds off, that one definitely will. I hope you now have a greater understanding of what representation in media really means, and the implications of it and its impact on society. Further, I hope that you grasp the reasons why many of us believe that greater representation is a great and important step forward in our society, even if you disagree. I hope I've also made it clear that a lot of the time these anti-diversity tropes and arguments are mostly bullshit, and the examples they use just don't support the claims in the way that they think they do. And finally, I suppose I should address the people on the opposite side of this debate who have not to my knowledge ever been able to deal with any of these arguments or had any rebuttals, but will possibly have just come to the end of a 5-hour live stream in which they pretended to have done so. My friends, please, look at your life. Are you okay? Do you need help? You seem very concerned with films and cartoons for children and whether or not there are enough cis-het white men in media nowadays. Have you considered going for a walk or taking up meditation? Getting so angry about people on the internet who have different opinions to you about fucking Star Wars constantly can't be healthy. I'm being serious now. Even if you're insisting on spending all of your time getting mad online in an incredibly smug way, have you considered perhaps watching another movie besides Hollywood action blockbusters, superhero movies, and hollow, cynical cash grab franchise movies designed to milk profits from an obedient audience of nerds exactly like you? Because I really do think it would be helpful in your understanding of film. Much better for your mental health, and above all, online media discourse, because it might lead you to being less toxic, which may hopefully trickle down to your equally toxic audiences who see it as their duty to harass anyone you publicly disagree with, so who knows. That's all for now. I hope this was informative. Class dismissed.
Star Wars has always been most loved by young white males, but like comics and everything else white males enjoy, they now have to share or give up their culture in this postmodern world.
Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. It did take quite a long time to write, and I'm sure that it will probably get a lot of backlash, and I may have to delete a load of abusive comments, so I look forward to that. But I hope it was informative, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will start work on the next one very soon. But of course you know why we're here by now. So the names on screen are the names of everyone who gives me money each month to make these videos, which is honestly fantastic. I cannot thank those people enough. It allows me to live and survive and buy food. If you'd like your name to join them, you can donate more than $1 on Patreon to me, or if you donate more than $5, not only do you get videos a day early, but I will also read out your name at the end of the credits specifically to thank you. So, today I especially want to thank Elise Jade, Braden Beck, Calliope, Chris Vagnacci, Emily, Good Poon Hates Cops, that's Solid Poon then, Nanza Kambe. Next we have Ryan, Brian, it's Brian, Pixels Green, Susie M, Theodor Pekelarov, The General Line, Thomas McCallum, and Tom Newport. Thanks so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!